Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of history's most overlooked perspectives, the life of a Viking thrall, a slave in the Norse world. Picture yourself waking on rough wooden planks, the smell of salt and tar filling your nostrils, your wrists burning from iron shackles. The rhythmic splash of oars cuts through cold northern waters as you realise with dawning horror that everything you knew is gone. Your village, your family, your name, all stripped away in a single morning raid. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why so many medieval skeletons show signs of extreme physical stress, or how the glittering Viking Age we see in museums was built on the bent backs of thousands whose names we'll never know. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below. But make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or if you've ever wondered about the untold stories hiding in history's shadows. Your support helps me bring these forgotten voices back to life, one sleep story at a time. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and the world tilts. Not metaphorically. The actual world beneath you rocks and sways with a stomach-churning rhythm. Wood creaks somewhere close to your ear. Your head throbs with a pain so intense you think perhaps you're still dreaming, still in your bed in the small farming settlement where you fell asleep last night. But the cold spray of seawater hitting your face shatters that hope. You try to move your hands to wipe your eyes, and that's when you feel it. The iron. Heavy cuffs circle your wrists, connected by a short length of chain that clinks when you shift. The sound is almost musical. A dark little melody that will become the soundtrack to your new existence. Around you, other bodies lie sprawled across the bottom of what you now recognize as longship. Some moan softly, others remain terrifyingly still. You remember fragments of this morning. Was it this morning? The sun just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky soft pink and gold. You were checking on the sheep in the pasture when you heard the screams. By the time you turned toward the village, figures were already pouring from boats pulled up on the beach. Men with axes and swords moving with practiced efficiency through the settlement. You ran, of course. Everyone ran. But these raiders knew what they were doing. They'd done this before, perhaps hundreds of times. Some villagers they cut down. Others, like you, they struck with the flat of their blades or the handles of their weapons, just hard enough to stun but not to kill. You remember the moment of impact, the explosion of white light behind your eyes, then nothing until now. The men rowing the ship speak a language you don't understand, though some words sound almost familiar, twisted versions of sounds you know. Norse, you think, though you've never travelled far enough from home to hear it spoken. These are Northmen, Vikings, the raiders your grandfather used to mention in stories that seemed designed more to scare children into obedience than to reflect any real threat. Turns out the old man wasn't exaggerating. You crane your neck, a movement that sends fresh spikes of pain through your skull, and see the coast of your homeland shrinking behind the ship. England's green hills grow smaller with each stroke of the oars. Or perhaps you're from Ireland, or Scotland, or one of the Frankish territories. Doesn't matter anymore. Geography is something that happens to other people now, people with freedom. A boot nudges your ribs, not gently. One of the raiders barks something at you, gesturing toward a bucket. You don't understand the words, but the meaning is clear enough. You're expected to bail water. Despite the chains, despite the headache, despite everything, you're expected to work. This you'll learn is the fundamental truth of your new existence. Thralls work. Always. You grasp the wooden bucket with both hands. The chain between your wrists makes individual movement impossible, and begin the monotonous task of scooping seawater and dumping it overboard. The ship leaks, as all wooden vessels do, and someone has to keep ahead of the incoming tide. That someone is you now. Historians still argue whether the term thrall derives from Old Norse thrall, meaning servant, or if it has earlier Germanic roots. But etymology provides cold comfort when you're chained in a longship. The Viking Age, typically dated from 793 to 1066 CE, saw perhaps hundreds of thousands of people enslaved and moved around the northern world. Recent DNA studies of medieval Icelandic remains show that while male settlers were predominantly Scandinavian, around 60 to 70% of female settlers had Celtic ancestry, a grim statistical echo of raids on Ireland and Scotland. You're becoming a data point in history, though you don't know it yet. Right now, you only know the ache in your arms, the cold water soaking your clothes, and the certainty that your old life is gone forever. The journey takes days, maybe a week. Time becomes fluid when every moment blurs into cold hunger and exhaustion. You're fed, but minimally, stale bread, dried fish that tastes like salted leather, water that smells faintly of the barrel it's stored in. The raiders take turns rowing and resting, sometimes singing songs that sound surprisingly melodic despite your circumstances. At night, when they ship anchors in a sheltered cove, some of them laugh and share mead while you and the other captives huddle together for warmth in the bottom of the boat. Nobody rapes you, which surprises you later when you understand more about Viking slave culture. Damaged merchandise sells for less, and these are businessmen as much as warriors. They're not taking you north for entertainment. They're taking you north because you're valuable. You're young enough to work for decades, healthy enough to survive the journey, and foreign enough that you'll have no family connections or escape routes in your new homeland. You're the perfect product. One morning, you wake to shouting that sounds different from the usual bark of orders. Excited, almost celebratory. You struggle to sit up and see land ahead, but this land looks nothing like home. The hills are steeper, more dramatic. Snow caps mountains even though it's summer. The water has changed from ocean grey to fjord blue, and the ship glides between towering cliffs that make you feel impossibly small. This is Norway, though you don't yet know the name. This is the heart of the Viking world, and you're about to be swallowed by it. The longship glides into a bustling harbour, and suddenly the world explodes with noise and activity. Dozens of vessels crowd the wooden docks, trading ships with rounded bellies, sleek warships with dragon heads carved into their prows, small fishing boats bobbing between the larger craft. The air fills with shouting in that harsh, guttural language you still don't understand, mixed with the crying of gulls and the rhythmic hammer of shipbuilders somewhere in the distance. You smell smoke, fish, tar, and something else. The dense, overwhelming scent of many humans living close together. This is a proper town, bigger than anything you've ever seen. Buildings climb the hillside in terraced rows, their turf roofs making them look like the earth itself grew houses. The raiders secure the ship and begin unloading their cargo. Cargo. That's what you are now. You and the other captives are pulled roughly to your feet, those who can stand anyway. One young woman hasn't moved since the second day of the voyage, and the Northmen simply step over her body as they work, already calculating the minor loss to their profit margin. Your legs buckle when you try to walk. You haven't stood in days and your muscles have forgotten how. A raider catches your arm, not kindly but not cruelly either, and shoves you forward. You stumble onto the dock, and for the first time in over a week you stand on ground that doesn't move beneath your feet. The solidity feels almost wrong after so many days of swaying with the waves. They march you through the town streets, if you can call them streets. They're more like muddy pathways between buildings, lined with wooden planks in the wettest spots. People stop to stare as your miserable column passes. Children point and laugh at your strange clothes, your foreign features. A dog barks. An old woman spits, though whether at you or the raiders, you can't tell. You see thralls working everywhere, hauling water, carrying goods, mucking out animal pens, and you realize with a sinking sensation that you can identify them instantly. They move differently than the free people, head slightly bowed, eyes down, their clothing noticeably shabbier. In just a few days, you've already learned to recognize your own kind. The marketplace opens before you like a vision from a nightmare. Stalls sell everything imaginable: furs, weapons, amber jewelry, silver arm rings, bolts of cloth, barrels of preserved fish, honey and clay pots, and people. In the centre of the square, a platform of rough timber serves as an auction block. Your captors lead you there directly, forcing you up wooden steps worn smooth by countless feet before yours. This is where you'll be sold. This is where whatever remains of your old identity will be stripped away and replaced with a price. The slave trader who purchased you and the others from the raiders is a heavy-set man with elaborate braids in his beard and enough silver rings on his arms to feed a village for a year. He's done this before. His practiced eye sweeps over each captive, assessing, calculating. He barks orders to his assistants, who begin organizing you by apparent value. The young and strong are positioned prominently. The sick, the old, and the very young are pushed to the back. You're placed in the front row. You should feel grateful, perhaps, that you're valuable, but gratitude seems like an emotion from another lifetime. Buyers begin to gather as the sun climbs higher. They're a mixed bunch. Wealthy landowners in fine wool cloaks, farmers in simpler dress looking for field hands, merchants seeking household servants, ship captains needing rowers. Some are clearly experienced buyers who examine captives with cold professionalism, checking teeth, squeezing arms to assess muscle, looking for signs of disease or injury. Others seem newer to the process, almost uncomfortable with the transaction. Historians still argue whether Viking society's dependence on slave labour increased or decreased over the centuries of the Viking Age, with some evidence suggesting the system became more entrenched as settlements grew, while other sources hint at gradual movement toward other labour systems. You don't care about historical trends, you care about which of these strangers will own you. The auction begins. The trader starts with a teenage boy, strong-looking but terrified, probably taken from the same raid as you. The bidding is brisk, conducted in shouted numbers and hand signals you don't understand. Within minutes, the boy is sold to a farmer who looks neither kind nor cruel, just practical. He's buying a tool, and the boy will be treated with exactly that much consideration. Next comes a middle-aged woman who weeps silently throughout her sale. Then a family. Mother, father, 2 children whom the trader sells as a unit, emphasizing their established bonds as a selling point. They'll work harder if kept together, he seems to be saying, and apparently the buyers agree because the bidding runs high. Then it's your turn. The trader pulls you forward, spinning you around to show the crowd your physique, your youth, your potential for decades of labour. He speaks rapidly, gesturing, possibly lying about your skills or temperament. How would he know? You could be lazy, rebellious, prone to running away. Or you could be obedient, hard-working, docile. The buyers have to gamble. You stand there trying to maintain some shred of dignity while strangers debate your worth in silver. It's violating in a way that transcends physical violence. This is your humanity being negotiated, weighed, priced. 3 buyers seem particularly interested. One is an older man with grey in his beard and calculating eyes, probably looking for general farm labour. Another is a younger merchant type, well-dressed, who might want you for his trading house or ship crew. The third is a woman, which surprises you. She's perhaps 40, wearing a long dress secured at the shoulders with ornate brooches, her hair bound under a linen cloth. She carries herself with authority, possibly a wealthy widow or the wife of an important man. Her gaze is shrewd but not unkind as she examines you. The bidding starts. You watch the numbers climb, 5 pieces of silver, 6, 7. Though you can't understand the words, you can count the fingers the bidders hold up, the nods of the auctioneer. The old farmer drops out first. It's down to the merchant and the woman. 8 pieces, 9. The merchant hesitates, calculates, then shakes his head and steps back. The woman has won. You've been sold for 9 pieces of silver, which you'll later learn is a respectable price. Middle tier. Not the cheapest, not the most expensive. Just another thrall changing hands in a market where such transactions happen daily. The woman approaches the platform and examines you more closely now that the sale is complete. She speaks to you in that Norse tongue, seems frustrated when you don't respond, then tries a few words in what might be Latin. You shake your head, helpless. She sighs, apparently resigned to owning a thrall who can't understand orders, at least not yet. She hands the silver to the trader, actual hack silver, pieces of cut-up jewellery and arm rings weighed on a small scale. The transaction complete, she gestures for you to follow. Your chains are removed, which provides a moment of relief until you realise why. You're not going to run. Where would you go? You don't know the language, the land, or even which direction leads to anything resembling safety. You're as imprisoned by ignorance and isolation as you ever were by iron. You follow the woman through the marketplace, past stalls where free people haggle over fish and fabric. Their concerns so mundane and normal they seem to mock your situation. She walks with purpose, not looking back to check if you're following. She knows you will. She's done this before. You're not her first thrall, probably not even her second or third. This is simply how her world works. Some people are free, some people are slaves, and that's as natural as rain or sunshine. The walk from the marketplace to your new master's estate takes perhaps an hour, winding uphill through the town and then out along a coastal path where the wind bites even in summer. Your new owner, you don't yet know her name, though you'll later learn she's called Astrid, walks with steady purpose while you trail behind like a lost puppy. Other thralls pass you on the road, carrying burdens or driving cattle, and they don't even glance your way. You're invisible to them, just another piece of human property changing locations. The realization settles in your stomach like a stone. This is normal here. You're not an aberration or an exception. You're the system working exactly as designed. The farmstead appears around a bend in the path, and despite everything, you catch your breath. It's larger than you expected. A main longhouse with a high turf roof surrounded by several smaller outbuildings. Sheep graze on the hillside beyond, and you can see cultivated fields stretching down toward the fjord. This is a prosperous household, not wealthy by the standards of jarls or kings, but comfortable, solid. Your owner is clearly a woman of means, which could be good or catastrophic depending on her temperament. Rich owners can afford to feed their thralls adequately, but they also have reputations to maintain, which means harsh discipline for any slave who embarrasses them. Astrid leads you directly to the longhouse, pushing open the heavy wooden door and gesturing for you to enter. You step inside and stop, momentarily overwhelmed by the sensory assault. The interior is dim despite the daylight outside. Only small, openable hatches near the roof peak allow light and let smoke escape from the long fire pit running down the centre of the hall. The smoke itself hangs thick in the rafters, creating a hazy atmosphere that makes your eyes water. The smell is intense. Wood smoke, yes, but also unwashed bodies, stored food, damp wool, and the distinct odour of the animals that apparently shelter here during winter. Platforms line both long walls, creating raised sleeping and living areas. Tapestries hang from support posts, their designs barely visible in the gloom. This is home now, though home is a word that's lost all meaning. Several people are already inside, going about their daily tasks. An older thrall woman tends the fire, carefully adding peat to keep it burning steadily. Two younger thralls, one male, one female, both probably in their teens, are grinding grain with heavy stones, the rhythmic scraping providing a soundtrack to the scene. A free woman, judging by her better clothing and the way she holds herself, is working at a vertical loom near one wall, her fingers moving expertly through the threads. She looks up when you enter, says something to Astrid in a questioning tone. Your owner responds, gesturing at you, and the other woman nods, looking you up and down with the same appraising expression you've seen from everyone who's evaluated you today. Astrid claps her hands twice, sharply, and the older thrall woman by the fire immediately stops what she's doing and hurries over. They converse in rapid Norse while you stand there, still dripping slightly from sea spray, exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely lost. The older thrall, you'll learn her name is Helga, taken from the Slavic lands decades ago, and now so integrated into this household she barely remembers her original language, finally turns to you and speaks slowly, in heavily accented but recognizable fragments of your own tongue. Your heart nearly stops. Someone here speaks your language. The relief is so intense you almost weep. You work here now, Helga says, her words halting, clearly dredging up vocabulary she hasn't used in years. I show, you follow, you obey. Yes. You nod frantically, pathetically grateful for even this broken communication. Good, she continues. Bad thrall. She draws a finger across her throat in a universal gesture. Good thrall. She mimes eating, sleeping. The message is clear. Behave and you'll survive. Rebel and you won't. It's not comforting exactly, but it's information. And information is the closest thing to power you have access to anymore. Helga takes you on a quick tour of the longhouse, pointing and naming things in Norse, then translating haltingly into your language when you look blank. The fire pit is the heart of everything. Cooking, warmth, light, social gathering. The platforms along the walls serve as seating during the day and sleeping spaces at night, with the family occupying the areas closest to the fire, while thralls sleep in the colder sections near the doors. Storage chests line the walls, containing everything from clothing to valuables to dried food. Clay pots, wooden buckets, tools and weapons hang from hooks or lean in corners. The loom dominates one end of the hall. Textile production is apparently a major activity here. At the far end, a small partitioned area provides slight privacy for their master and mistress, though privacy is a relative term when 20 or more people share one long room. The kitchen area, if it can be called that, is simply the section of the longhouse closest to the fire, with the most cooking implements. Clay pots for boiling, flat stones for baking, iron hooks for hanging kettles over the flames, and a selection of wooden spoons and knives that look like they've been in use for generations. You'll learn that thralls do virtually all the cooking, which makes sense. Free women supervise, but they don't want to spend all day in the smoke and heat. Historians still argue whether Viking Age households were more communal in their earlier phases, with less distinction between free and unfree members, or whether the strict hierarchy was always present. You don't need historical perspective to understand the hierarchy here. It's visible in who sits closest to the fire, who eats first, who gives orders and who obeys them. Helga leads you outside to show you the outbuildings. There's a separate kitchen house, used mainly in summer when cooking inside the longhouse makes it unbearably hot. A bathhouse, which surprises you. You'd heard stories that Northmen were filthy barbarians, but apparently they bathe more regularly than people back home, heating stones and pouring water over them to create steam. A smithy where metal tools are repaired and created. A weaving shed for working in better light than the smoky longhouse provides. Various storage buildings for hay, grain and tools. And then, set slightly apart from everything else, a low structure that's barely more than a shed with a door. Thrall House, Helga says simply, and your stomach sinks. This is where you'll sleep. She pushes the door open, and you peer inside. It's dark, cramped, and smells of unwashed bodies and damp earth. Rough sleeping platforms line the walls, covered with thin layers of straw and ratty furs that look like they were already worn out before being relegated to slave quarters. There are no windows, no fire pit, just 4 walls, a roof, and the bare minimum needed to keep thralls alive enough to work. 6 people sleep here, Helga explains. Herself, the 2 young thralls you saw grinding grain, 2 field workers who are out with the livestock, and now you. 6 bodies in a space barely large enough for 3, with no heat source except shared body warmth. You think of the cosy cottage where you grew up, with its proper hearth and your own sleeping alcove. And something inside you finally breaks. You don't cry. Tears feel too small for this. But something fundamental shifts. Your old life isn't coming back. This is real. This is permanent. Helga seems to sense your despair because her weathered face softens slightly. First days, hard, she says. Then, you forget. Better to forget. The sadness in her voice suggests she knows exactly what she's saying, that survival means letting go of who you were, what you had, everyone you loved. It means becoming someone new, someone smaller, someone who exists only to serve. The alternative is to break completely, to refuse food and work until you simply waste away. Some thralls choose that path. The ones who survive are the ones who adapt, who forget. You wake in darkness so complete you momentarily panic, thinking perhaps you've gone blind during the night. Then you hear the breathing of 5 other people in the cramped thrall house and remember where you are. The memory hits like a physical blow, yesterday's auction, the walk to the farmstead, the tour of your new prison. For a moment you lie still, hoping desperately that if you don't move, don't acknowledge reality, you might somehow slip back into unconsciousness and wake up in your real bed, in your real life. But a rough hand shakes your shoulder and Helga's voice cuts through the darkness. Up! Work starts! You stumble outside into pre-dawn greyness, following the shuffling forms of the other thralls. The air is shockingly cold against your face. You're much farther north than home, and even summer nights here carry an edge that promises the brutal winter to come. Stars still scatter the sky above. More stars than you've ever seen, though you're too exhausted to appreciate their beauty. Your body aches from sleeping on the thin straw mattress, your muscles stiff from days of cramped positioning on the ship. Everything hurts. This, you'll learn, is the permanent condition of thralldom. Everything always hurts. Helga leads you to the well first, a stone-lined pit with a wooden bucket on a rope. Water, she says unnecessarily, miming the motion of drawing and carrying. Every morning, fill. She points to a line of large clay vessels near the longhouse door. 6 of them, each big enough that when filled they're almost too heavy to carry. This is your first task every single morning. Haul enough water to supply an entire household for the day. Cooking water, cleaning water, drinking water for both humans and animals. Water for the bathhouse if anyone wants to steam. The well is perhaps 200 paces from the longhouse, which doesn't sound far until you make the trip 20 times before the sun is fully up. Arms burning, back screaming, your hands already blistering from the rough rope. On your 4th trip you pause to catch your breath and notice other thralls emerging from buildings across the landscape. They move like shadows in the dim light, each heading toward their assigned morning tasks. Smoke begins to rise from various hearths as fires are coaxed back to life from their overnight embers. A rooster crows somewhere, though it sounds different from the roosters at home. Even the chickens have accents here, apparently. The thought is absurd enough that you almost laugh, then almost cry instead. You're so tired. You're so far from home. And the day has barely begun. By the time you finish the water hauling, the eastern sky is turning from grey to pink. Your tunic is soaked with sweat despite the cool air, and your hands are definitely blistering. Helga inspects your work, counting the full vessels, checking that you haven't slopped too much, then nods grudging approval. "Now, fire," she says, leading you back to the longhouse. Inside, one of the younger thralls has already started encouraging the banked coals from last night, adding kindling carefully. You watch as she demonstrates the technique. Too much fuel too fast and you smother the coals, too little and the fire dies. It's a skill that takes practice, reading the fire's needs, understanding exactly when to add peat or wood. You'll be expected to master this, along with everything else. Once the fire is crackling properly, the cooking begins. Breakfast for a household this size means work for multiple thralls. Porridge is the staple, barley or oats cooked slowly in one of the large clay pots, stirred constantly to prevent burning. You're handed a long wooden spoon and positioned by the pot. "Stir," Helga instructs, miming the circular motion. "No stop. Burn bad." So you stir, your arms still aching from the water hauling, watching the thick grain gradually soften and absorb the liquid. The heat from the fire is intense on your face, and the smoke makes your eyes water constantly. This is what they mean when they say smoke-filled hall. It's not poetic description, it's literal reality. You'll learn to function while essentially half blind from constant tears, breathing shallowly to minimise the burning in your lungs. While you stir porridge, other thralls prepare additional food. Flatbread is baked on hot stones. Dried fish is soaked and cut into portions. Cheese is sliced. Small beer, a weak, barely alcoholic beverage safer than water, is ladled into cups. Everything has to be ready before the family rises, which means thralls have been working for over an hour before the first free person opens their eyes. The household's free members will eat first and best. The thralls will eat what remains, if anything remains, and often it doesn't. You'll learn to eat quickly when food is available because you never know when the next meal might come. The family begins to stir as dawn properly breaks. First comes Bjorn, Astrid's adult son, a broad-shouldered man in his 30s who barely glances at the thralls scurrying to serve him. He's followed by his wife Ingrid, the woman you saw at the loom yesterday, and their 2 young children, a boy and a girl who chase each other around the longhouse, while their mother yells at them ineffectually. Astrid emerges last from the partitioned sleeping area, looking remarkably composed for someone who just woke up. As the matriarch and apparent head of household, her husband died several years ago, you'll learn, she commands immediate respect. Everyone straightens slightly when she enters the main area, even her adult son. They eat while you serve, refilling cups, bringing additional bread, stoking the fire to keep the hall warm. You're invisible during this process, a mobile piece of furniture that anticipates needs and fulfills them silently. When Bjorn gestures at his empty cup, you move immediately to refill it. When the little girl drops a piece of cheese, you pick it up without being asked. This is the core skill of thralldom, reading the needs and desires of free people and meeting them before being told, becoming so attuned to their rhythms that you seem to vanish except when needed. Historians still argue whether Viking thralls developed a distinct subculture with its own customs and resistance strategies, or whether the isolation and constant work made such organisation impossible. Right now, organisation is the last thing on your mind. You're just trying to remember to breathe while stirring porridge, and not trip over the children and somehow not collapse from exhaustion. After the family finishes eating, a process that feels interminable but probably only lasts 20 minutes, they leave the hall to begin their own day's work. Bjorn heads to the fields to supervise free farmhands and additional thralls. Ingrid settles at her loom. Astrid reviews household accounts, examining tally sticks and discussing the day's tasks with Helga in rapid Norse. The children do whatever children do, which apparently includes tormenting thralls when they get bored. You'll learn to stay out of their way. Finally, you're allowed to eat. The remaining porridge, the burned bits from the bottom of the pot mostly, gets divided among 6 thralls. It's barely warm, slightly charred, and there's not nearly enough, but you shovel it into your mouth with desperate gratitude. Food is food. You're alive. You made it through your first morning. Only several thousand more mornings to go. After the meagre breakfast, there's no rest period. No gentle transition into the day's labour. Helga simply points toward the door and says fields, and you understand that the real work is about to begin. The morning tasks, water hauling, fire tending, cooking, were merely the warm-up, the preliminary chores before the back-breaking labour that will consume the next 10 or 12 hours. You follow the 2 field thralls, a man named something that sounds like Orm and a younger fellow whose name you don't catch, down the sloping path toward the cultivated land that stretches between the farmstead and the fjord. The fields look deceptively peaceful in the morning light, rectangular plots of barley and oats swaying gently in the breeze, with smaller garden areas closer to the buildings where vegetables grow. But you're not here to admire the scenery. Orm hands you a heavy iron hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands before yours, and gestures toward a section of field that's thick with weeds. He mimes the chopping motion, demonstrating how to swing the tool to cut through the unwanted plants without damaging the crops. Then he walks away to his own section, leaving you to figure out the details through trial and error. You begin to swing the hoe, and within minutes you understand that this is going to be torture. The tool is heavier than it looked, and each swing requires engaging your entire body, shoulders, back, legs, core. The weeds are tougher than expected, their roots gripping the earth with stubborn determination. Sweat begins to pour down your face despite the cool air. Your hands, already blistered from the morning's water hauling, scream in protest as they grip the rough wood. You adjust your hold, which helps briefly, then makes it worse as new blisters form. There's no winning, no comfortable position, no technique that eliminates the pain. There's only continuing to swing the hoe over and over, moving incrementally down the row while the sun climbs higher and your muscles turn to fire. The Viking agricultural system depended heavily on slave labour for the most physically demanding tasks. Free farmers owned the land and made decisions, but thralls provided the muscle that turned rocky, challenging northern soil into productive farmland. Archaeological evidence from Viking Age farms shows that grain production was surprisingly efficient given the harsh climate, suggesting that intensive labour, the kind only available through slavery, made the difference between survival and starvation for many Norse communities. You're part of that equation now, a unit of labour power measured in how many rows you can weed, how much earth you can turn, how many stones you can clear from fields before your body gives out completely. Time becomes strange when you're performing repetitive physical labour. Sometimes it seems to stop entirely, and you look up expecting hours to have passed only to find the sun has barely moved. Other times you work in a kind of trance, and suddenly it's midday and you have no memory of the intervening hours. Your world narrows to the immediate, the weed in front of you, the swing of the hoe, the burning in your shoulders, the desperate hope that eventually someone will call a break. Nobody does. You work straight through the morning, through what should be the midday meal into the afternoon. At some point, one of the thralls brings water around. Just water, no food, and you drink greedily, the lukewarm liquid the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. The other thralls work with a steady mechanical efficiency that you can't match. They've been doing this for years, their bodies hardened to the labour, their minds skilled at the disassociation required to survive. Orm moves through his section twice as fast as you manage, never seeming to tire, his strokes economical and effective. You try to match his pace and nearly collapse after a dozen swings. He glances over, sees you struggling, and his expression isn't unkind, just tired. He's seen new thralls before. Most don't last. The weak ones die within the first year from illness, injury, or simply giving up. The ones who survive are the ones whose bodies adapt, who find some reserve of strength or stubbornness that carries them through the initial breaking-in period. You're in that period now, and every fibre of your being is screaming that you won't make it. Around what you guess is mid-afternoon, the sun is past its peak but not yet thinking about setting. Bjorn appears at the field's edge with two free farm hands. They walk slowly through the plots, examining the work, occasionally pulling up a weed that was missed, or pointing out a section that needs more attention. When they reach your area, Bjorn stops and surveys what you've accomplished. His face shows no emotion as he takes in the half-finished row, the uneven chopping, the obvious signs of struggle. He says something to Orm in Norse. Orm responds, gesturing at you, probably explaining that you're new. Bjorn nods once, then walks on. You have no idea if that assessment was positive or damning, whether you've met expectations or failed them. The uncertainty is almost worse than outright condemnation. The work continues. Your hands are definitely bleeding now beneath the forming blisters. You can feel the wetness, the sting when sweat drips into the open wounds. Your back has moved beyond pain into a kind of numb ache that you know will return with vengeance once you stop moving. Your legs tremble with each step, but you don't stop. You can't stop. Stopping means being useless, and useless thralls don't eat, or worse, don't survive. So you swing the hoe over and over, row after row, becoming a machine made of meat and bone and desperation. As the sun finally begins its descent toward the western mountains, Orm straightens and stretches, signalling that the fieldwork is done for the day. You nearly weep with relief. Your section is still only partially complete. You'll have to finish it tomorrow, adding to tomorrow's workload. But at least today's torture is over. You follow the other thralls back up the slope toward the farmstead, moving like an old person, your body stiff and complaining with every step. The other thralls walk normally, discussing something in Norse, already recovered from the day's labour. You limp behind them, wondering how long it takes to reach that level of adaptation, whether you'll live long enough to find out. But the day isn't over, not even close. Back at the longhouse, there's evening chores waiting. Animals need feeding and watering. The evening meal must be prepared. Floors need sweeping. Tools need cleaning and storing. The fire needs constant attention. Historians still argue whether the Viking Age working day was actually longer or shorter than medieval European norms, with some evidence suggesting Norse farmers worked intense seasonal bursts followed by easier winters, while other sources indicate year-round grinding labour. From your perspective, the only thing that matters is that the work never ends. When one task finishes, another immediately takes its place. There's no moment of rest, no acknowledgement of your exhaustion, no compassion for your wounds. There's only the next task, and the next, and the next. You help prepare the evening meal in a haze of fatigue, stirring another pot of porridge, this time with dried fish added, making it slightly more substantial, while simultaneously trying not to fall into the fire. You serve the family again, refill cups again, clean up after them again. Finally, as darkness settles completely over the farmstead, and the family retires to their sleeping areas, the thralls are dismissed to their quarters. You stumble to the thrall house, collapse onto your straw mattress, and lose consciousness before you can even process the day you've just survived. You wake to Helga's rough shake again, and for a confused moment you think perhaps only minutes have passed, that the darkness you fell into was just a blink. But no, it's morning again. Another pre-dawn awakening, another day of endless labour stretching before you. Your body feels like it belongs to someone else, someone who's been beaten thoroughly and left in a ditch. Every muscle screams. Your hands have scabbed over during the fight, and when you try to flex your fingers, the scabs crack and fresh blood seeps through. Your back has locked into a position of permanent stiffness, and standing upright sends sparks of pain shooting down your legs. This is only your second full day. How does anyone survive years of this? In the dim light filtering through cracks in the thrall house walls, you can finally see your sleeping quarters properly. The space is roughly 12 feet by 15 feet, with a ceiling so low that Orm, the tallest among you, has to stoop slightly to avoid the rafters. The sleeping platforms are just rough planks laid across supports, with shallow boxes underneath where thralls can store their few possessions, except you have no possessions, nothing but the clothes you are wearing when captured. The straw mattresses are thin to the point of uselessness, and the furs covering them are patchy and worn, providing minimal warmth. There's no decoration, no attempt at comfort, nothing that acknowledges the humanity of the people who sleep here. It's storage for human tools, nothing more. The other thralls are already moving, preparing for the day with the efficient movements of long practice. The young woman, you've learned her name is Signa, taken from Denmark 3 years ago, wraps her feet in strips of cloth before putting on her worn leather shoes. The young man, Leif, is checking his tunic for tears that need mending. Orm simply stands and stretches, his joints popping audibly in the quiet morning. Helga is already fully dressed, splashing water on her face from a small wooden bowl. Everyone moves in near silence, conserving energy, not wasting breath on unnecessary conversation. You'll learn this rhythm too. The thrall house is a place for sleeping and basic maintenance, nothing more. There's no socializing, no comfort, no space for the small pleasures that make life bearable. As you emerge into the pre-dawn cold, you notice details you missed yesterday in your fog of exhaustion. The thrall house is deliberately positioned at the edge of the farmstead, farther from the main buildings than the animal pens. Even the livestock are housed closer to the family. The message is clear. Thralls rank below cattle in the household hierarchy. The structure itself is the poorest on the property, walls made from the poorest quality wood, a roof that probably leaks in heavy rain, no proper foundation, just posts driven into the earth. In winter this place must be absolutely brutal. No fire, no insulation, just 6 bodies huddled together trying to share warmth while frost creeps through every crack. Archaeological excavations of Viking Age farms have occasionally found small, poorly constructed buildings set apart from the main structures, which researchers believe were thrall quarters. These buildings typically show no signs of internal heating, minimal artifacts, and construction quality far below the other structures on the site. Some skeletons found near these buildings show evidence of severe nutritional deficiency, untreated injuries, and repetitive stress disorders consistent with heavy labour. You're living in what will eventually become an archaeological puzzle. You're suffering reduced to data points about post-hole depth and bone pathology. But right now, you're not history. You're just cold and hurting and facing another impossible day. The morning routine repeats: water hauling, fire tending, cooking. Your bleeding hands make gripping the well rope agony, but you manage. You have to manage. Complaining isn't an option when you don't speak the language, and even if you could communicate your pain, what would be the point? Everyone can see your hands, everyone knows you're suffering, they simply don't care. Or perhaps more accurately, they can't afford to care. Astrid runs an efficient household, and efficiency requires pushing workers to their limits. Showing weakness invites harsher treatment, not sympathy. So you haul water with bleeding hands and try not to whimper when the rope cuts into the raw flesh. After breakfast, another rushed meal of burned porridge scraped from the pot bottom. You're sent to different work today. Instead of the fields, Helga leads you to the animal pens. The smell hits you first. A thick, overwhelming combination of manure, wet wool, and something musty you can't quite identify. Sheep crowd the largest pen, dozens of them bleating and pressing against each other. Pigs root in their muddy enclosure. A few cattle stand in a separate area, chewing cud with expressions of magnificent indifference. Chickens scratch everywhere, completely free range, pecking at anything that might be edible. "Clean," Helga says, handing you a wooden shovel and pointing at the pig pen. The message is clear enough. You're mucking out the animals, shoveling manure and soiled straw into a cart, then presumably hauling it somewhere for disposal or composting. It's disgusting work. But after yesterday's field labour, at least it doesn't require the same full-body exertion. You can pace yourself slightly, work methodically rather than desperately. The pigs watch you with intelligent eyes as you invade their space, probably wondering why this new human is so clumsy with the shovel. You work alone for the most part, which is both blessing and curse. Blessing because nobody watches you struggle and judges your incompetence. Curse because loneliness settles over you like a heavy cloak, and for the first time since capture, you have mental space to truly process what's happened to you. Your family. Do they think you're dead? Did the raiders kill anyone during the attack, or did they just take slaves? Your mother, your siblings, your friends, they're going on with their lives somewhere far to the south, probably mourning you, definitely unable to help you. You'll never see them again. The certainty of that hits you while you're standing knee-deep in pig manure, and you have to stop and grip the shovel tightly to keep from collapsing. You'll never see them again, never go home, never be free. This is your life now, forever, until you die. A chicken pecks at your foot, startling you back to the present. You blink away tears, or maybe it's just the smell making your eyes water, and return to shoveling. Grief is a luxury you can't afford. Grief takes energy, and you need every scrap of energy just to survive. So you push the feelings down, way down, into some locked compartment in your chest where maybe they'll stay dormant. Helga said it yesterday, better to forget. Maybe she's right. Maybe the only way through this is to become someone new, someone who doesn't remember enough to mourn. By midday, you've cleaned 3 animal pens and hauled 5 carts of manure to the composting area behind the fields. Your clothes are filthy, you smell like pig waste, and you're fairly certain you've stepped in something unspeakable at least twice. But the work is done, and there's a small satisfaction in that. Looking at the clean pens with fresh straw, seeing the animals settle more comfortably. It's the first thing you've accomplished since becoming a thrall that feels remotely like achievement rather than just survival. The feeling lasts approximately 30 seconds before Helgafser appears and assigns you to help with butchering. Apparently one of the older sheep needs to be culled and thralls do the killing. Historians still argue whether Viking thralls were permitted to own small personal items, or whether even their clothing technically belonged to their masters. Some saga references suggest thralls could accumulate tiny amounts of property, while other sources indicate complete ownership of the slave's person and possessions. You don't own anything now. Even the filthy tunic you're wearing belongs to Astrid. Your body belongs to her. Your time, your strength, your future, all owned by someone else. As you follow Helga toward the sheep pen, you wonder if your thoughts belong to you at least. Can she own those too? Or is the inside of your head the only territory that remains yours? Weeks blur together into a rhythm of exhaustion and labour, until one morning you wake to unusual sounds filtering into the thrall house. Laughter, music, the buzz of many voices talking excitedly. Helga's face shows something almost like anticipation as she shakes you awake. Festival day, she says in a halting version of your language. Big work, but... She pauses, searching for words. Also rest. Maybe... The maybe hangs in the air like a promise that might evaporate, but it's more hope than you've had in weeks. Outside, the farmstead has transformed overnight. Colourful cloth banners hang between buildings, fluttering in the morning breeze. The main longhouse door stands wide open despite the cool air, and you can smell something far better than the usual porridge cooking. Roasting meat, fresh bread, something sweet that makes your mouth water involuntarily. Free people are arriving from neighbouring farms, dressed in their finest clothes. The men wear bright tunics with elaborate brooches, their beards freshly combed and braided. The women glitter with jewellery, silver and bronze arm rings, intricate necklace chains, tortoise brooches holding up their overdresses. Even the children are scrubbed clean and dressed in miniature versions of adult finery. This is a blot, Helga explains, a sacrificial feast honouring the gods. Several times a year the community gathers for these celebrations, combining religious ritual with social bonding and, most importantly from your perspective, excessive eating and drinking. The preparations have been ongoing for days, though you are too exhausted to notice. Animals have been selected for sacrifice. Special ale has been brewed. Every household has contributed food, and the resulting feast will be spectacular by Norse standards. For the free people, anyway. For thralls, it's complicated. The work intensifies immediately. You're pulled into the longhouse where organised chaos reigns. Multiple cooking fires burn, tended by sweating thralls. Enormous pots bubble with stews. Whole animals rotate on spits, fat dripping and sizzling in the flames. Thralls rush everywhere, setting up trestle tables, arranging benches, hauling endless supplies of food and drink from storage buildings. Sina is cutting vegetables with desperate speed, while life struggles under the weight of a barrel of ale. You're handed a knife and a pile of root vegetables and told to chop. Your scarred hands protest, but you work as fast as you can, trying to keep pace with the demands. The free people begin arriving in earnest around midday. Important families first. A local jarl with his entourage, wealthy farmers, ship captains, even a travelling merchant who's been invited for his interesting stories and exotic goods. They enter the longhouse with loud greetings, embracing hosts, admiring the preparations. Astrid moves among them like a queen accepting compliments on her household's hospitality. Bjorn stands proudly beside her, clearly enjoying the status that comes from hosting a successful feast. The children dart between adult legs, wild with excitement at having so many people and so much activity around them. The religious ceremony begins in the late afternoon. A gothi, a priest, though that's not quite the right word, leads the gathering outside to a cleared area where a makeshift altar has been erected. The animal selected for sacrifice is a fine ram, its horns decorated with ribbons. You watch from the required distance, thralls not being permitted close to the sacred space during the actual ritual. The gothi speaks in formal, archaic Norse that even the free people seem to struggle understanding. He makes gestures to the sky, to the earth, invoking gods whose names sound harsh and powerful: Thor, Odin, Freyr. The ram is killed with practiced efficiency, its blood caught in a wooden bowl and sprinkled on the altar, on the gathered people, on the ground itself as an offering. Historians still argue whether Viking religious practice was genuinely devout or more social custom, whether belief in the gods was literal or metaphorical, and how much regional variation existed in rituals. From your perspective, watching blood spatter on well-dressed farmers who cheer and raise drinking horns, the ceremony seems like theatre mixed with genuine reverence, a way of binding the community together through shared ritual and shared sacrifice. You're excluded from this binding, of course. Thralls might be present at blots, but you're not participants. You're not part of the community seeking divine favour. You're just there. After the ceremony, the real celebration begins. Everyone crowds back into the longhouse, which has been transformed into a feast hall. The trestle tables groan under platters of food, roasted meat from the sacrificed animals, boiled grains flavoured with herbs, soft cheeses, preserved fruits, fresh bread that's still warm, and more. Drinking horns circulate constantly, filled and refilled with ale, mead, and imported wine for the wealthiest guests. The noise level rises as people eat and drink, conversations growing louder, laughter more frequent. Someone produces a lyre and begins playing. Others join in singing, old songs about heroes and battles and gods walking among mortals. You serve. All the thralls serve, moving constantly between the kitchen area and the tables, refilling cups, bringing fresh platters, clearing away bones and scraps. The guests treat you as mobile furniture, speaking around you, sometimes through you, occasionally to you when they need something. A drunk farmer grabs your arm as you pass, pulling you close to examine your face. Foreign, he slurs in Norse, as if this is a profound observation. Very foreign. His companions laugh. You stand frozen, uncertain what response is expected or permitted, until he releases you and waves you away dismissively. Your heart pounds as you retreat to the kitchen area. Being noticed by drunk free people is dangerous. They might find you amusing or they might find you irritating, and there's no predicting which. Hours pass. The celebration grows louder, messier, more chaotic. Fights nearly break out over perceived insults, then dissolve into backslapping reconciliation. A woman weeps about her dead husband until others distract her with more mead. The children, allowed to stay up far past their usual bedtime, race around the hall shrieking with joy. And through it all, the thralls work, maintaining the infrastructure that allows free people to celebrate. You're exhausted, your feet aching from constant movement, your arms sore from carrying heavy platters. But there's something almost hypnotic about the feast's energy, the music and laughter washing over you like a wave. For brief moments, you can almost forget you're a slave. Almost. Then comes the unexpected gift. As the night deepens and the guests grow too drunk to eat much more, Astrid makes a gesture to Helga. Helga's face lights up. Actual joy, which you've never seen on her weathered features, and she quickly gathers the other thralls. She leads you all to the kitchen area where the remains of the feast sit. Half-eaten roasts, chunks of bread, cheese rinds, vegetables that fell off platters. Eat, she says simply. Tonight we eat. You don't need to be told twice. You fall on the food like a starving animal because that's essentially what you are. Real meat, not just the scraps or organs usually relegated to thralls. Fresh bread still soft in the centre. Cheese that hasn't gone hard and cracked. You eat until your stomach aches, until you can't possibly consume another bite, storing calories against future hunger. Around you, the other thralls do the same, eating with focused intensity while occasionally glancing toward the celebrating free people, making sure this permission won't suddenly be revoked. This is the bargain of festival days. Thralls work twice as hard but receive twice the food. It's calculated generosity. Well-fed thralls are stronger workers, and the cost of extra food during festivals is negligible compared to the labour extracted. But sitting there with grease on your fingers and your belly actually full for once, you don't care about the calculation. You're just grateful. The gratitude shames you slightly. Shouldn't you resent these scraps, these leftovers, this degrading system? But hunger is a powerful force, and a full stomach feels like luxury regardless of how you achieved it. The days following the festival feel even harder than before, as if your body remembers what fullness feels like and resents returning to perpetual hunger. But something shifts in the thrall house during those long, dark evenings after work ends. Perhaps it's the shared memory of the feast, or perhaps it's simply that you've survived long enough for the others to begin seeing you as permanent rather than temporary, someone who might actually make it rather than another new thrall who'll die or break within weeks. Whatever the reason, the silence that usually fills the cramped space begins, gradually, to crack. It starts with Sina. One evening, as everyone settles onto their sleeping platforms, she begins humming, quietly, almost under her breath, a melody that sounds like a lullaby from some distant homeland. The tune is haunting, rising and falling with a sadness that needs no translation. Nobody tells her to stop. Orm shifts on his platform listening. Leif closes his eyes. Even Helga, usually so focused on conserving energy for tomorrow's labour, seems to soften slightly. The humming continues for perhaps 5 minutes, then fades into silence. But the silence feels different now, less empty, more shared. The next night Leif speaks, not in Norse but in his own language, which sounds completely foreign to you, something Slavic, you think, though you're no expert. He talks for several minutes, his voice low and rhythmic, clearly telling a story though you can't understand the words. When he finishes, Orm responds in yet another language, and they have a brief exchange that excludes everyone else. You realise that the Thrall house is a Tower of Babel in miniature. 6 people from perhaps 5 different homelands, each carrying languages that the others can't fully understand. Yet somehow, in the shared misery and exhaustion, Communication happens anyway through tone, gesture, and the universal language of suffering. On the third night you gather courage and speak. Just a few sentences in your own language. About your village, your family, nothing profound. The words feel strange in your mouth after weeks of silence. Helga translates some of it into broken Norse for the others, adding her own commentary. Sina responds with her own story in Danish, which Helga also translates. Slowly, painfully, through Helga's fragmented, multilingual abilities and generous amounts of gesture, you begin to learn about your fellow thralls. Not everything, certainly. There's too much that can't be translated, too many experiences that resist simple explanation, but enough to feel less alone. Sina was captured during a raid on a Danish coastal village 3 years ago. She was 14 then, barely more than a child. Her entire family was killed during the attack. She watched it happen. She was brought north specifically because she was young and female, valuable for both labour and potential breeding. She's never been touched inappropriately by anyone in this household, she manages to communicate, which Helga presents as evidence of Astrid's relative decency. Bad masters use women, Helga explains bluntly. Astrid, no allow, she searches for words. Christian? No, before Christian. Old way. Women not things. You're not sure this counts as progressive by any reasonable standard, but apparently in the Viking thrall economy, not being routinely raped is considered good treatment. Leif comes from somewhere far to the east, a place he calls by a name you can't pronounce. He was a merchant's son, captured not in a raid but by slavers who specifically hunted for merchandise in distant markets. He was sold and resold several times before ending up here. And his Norse is better than most because he's been in Scandinavia for 5 years now. He's perhaps 18, though malnutrition and hard labour make age difficult to gauge. He dreams, he admits in halting confessions, of escape, of somehow making his way back east, finding his family if they still live. It's a fantasy everyone knows. Thralls who run are hunted down by dogs and neighbours who receive rewards for returning human property. Recaptured runaways face brutal punishment, brandings, maimings, or simply death as examples. But everyone needs dreams, even impossible ones. Orm is the mystery. He speaks the least, watches the most, and his Norse is perfect, suspiciously perfect. Helga won't translate his story directly, but from fragments you gather that he was born free in Norway, possibly from a family of some standing, and became a thrall through debt or crime rather than capture. This makes him different, more shameful somehow, in the Norse social hierarchy. At least foreign thralls can claim they were honourable free people before misfortune struck. Orm apparently chose slavery, or more accurately, had slavery chosen for him through his own failings. The specifics remain obscure, locked behind his silence and Helga's reluctance to expose him. But his eyes carry a different quality of pain than the rest of you. Not the sharp grief of stolen freedom, but the dull ache of squandered birthright. Helga's story emerges in pieces over several nights. She's older, perhaps 50, ancient by thrall standards, and was captured during a raid on a Slavic settlement over 30 years ago. She was young then, newly married, possibly pregnant, though she won't confirm this directly. Everything was taken: husband, home, future, and possibly a child who either died or was sold separately. She's survived through absolute obedience and the ability to make herself useful in ways beyond pure physical labour. She speaks several languages, understands Norse customs, can midwife and treat minor illnesses, and has become the sort of senior slave that households depend on. Astrid trusts her, relatively speaking, to manage the other thralls and maintain order. It's a tiny amount of power in a powerless existence. But Helga clings to it because it's all she has. These nighttime conversations, stilted, broken, conducted in multiple languages with generous misunderstandings, become the highlight of your existence. Not because the stories themselves are particularly uplifting, but because for brief moments in the darkness, you're people again rather than just labour units. You laugh sometimes, usually at the absurdity of trying to communicate complex ideas through charades and fractured translations. You cry sometimes too, though quietly, because loud grief might disturb the longhouse and bring unwanted attention. You learn to read each other's moods, to offer small kindnesses when possible, Leaf sharing an extra scrap of food he saved, Sina helping you rewrap your foot bindings when they come loose, Orm standing slightly closer during harsh wind to share body heat. Historians still argue whether enslaved people in Viking society formed genuine communities, or whether the isolation and constant movement of slaves prevented meaningful bonds. Archaeological evidence is silent on emotional connections, leaving only the material record of chains and poor graves. But here, in this cramped, cold space that smells of unwashed bodies and damp earth, community forms anyway. Not because anyone plans it or because conditions allow for it, but because humans are social creatures who build connections in even the most desolate circumstances. You're not friends exactly. Friendship seems too light a word for what you share. You're survivors, bound together by circumstance and need, finding tiny pockets of humanity in an inhumane system. One night Orm does something unexpected. He reaches into the gap between wall planks where he apparently hides his few possessions and pulls out a small wooden figure no bigger than his thumb. It's crudely carved but recognizable as a horse. He holds it up in the dim light filtering through cracks, and everyone leans closer to see. "I make," he says in Norse, then glances at you and tries your language. "I craft?" Close enough. He made this, carved it during some stolen moment, creating beauty or at least representation from a scrap of wood. It's contraband. Thralls aren't supposed to have possessions or hobbies or any activity not directly related to work. But here it is, proof that even under total control, humans create. Orm passes it around. Each person holds it briefly, carefully, reverently, then returns it. Nobody speaks. The moment is too fragile for words. Then Orm tucks it back into his hiding place, and everyone settles into sleep. You lie awake longer than usual that night, thinking about the wooden horse. It's such a small thing, almost nothing, but it represents something larger. The persistence of self despite every effort to erase it. The system wants you to be tools, livestock, objects, but you keep being human anyway. You tell stories, share food, carve horses from scrap wood, hum lullabies in the darkness. It's not resistance exactly. It's just continuation. The quiet insistence that you exist beyond your utility. That you matter even when everything in your world says you don't. Living in the Longhouse means navigating an intricate web of personalities and power dynamics that shift constantly depending on mood, circumstance, and the unpredictable whims of free people. You learn quickly that Astrid, while technically your owner, is not the only person whose favour or displeasure can make your life easier or unbearable. The household operates as a complex hierarchy where everyone except the thralls holds some degree of power over you, and understanding these relationships becomes crucial to survival. Astrid herself is a study in contradictions. She's stern, efficient, and demands absolute obedience, but she's not casually cruel. She doesn't hit thralls for entertainment or create suffering beyond what's necessary to maintain order and productivity. By Viking standards, this apparently qualifies as good treatment. She's widowed. Her husband died in a trading expedition gone wrong about 5 years ago, and has managed the farm independently since then, a remarkable achievement for a Norse woman. This means she had to be tougher, more competent, more ruthlessly efficient than any man in a similar position. She can't afford softness or sentimentality, even toward enslaved people who might, in another context, deserve compassion. You watch her sometimes, moving through the longhouse with absolute authority, and wonder what she might have been like before circumstances forced her to become so hard. Her son Bjorn is less predictable. He's a large man, strong and capable in the fields, but there's an undercurrent of frustration in him that occasionally explodes. He resents, you gather from overheard conversations, that his father died before teaching him enough about trade networks and ship management. He's stuck being a farmer when he imagined becoming a merchant or even a raider. This resentment sometimes manifests as irritability toward everyone around him, including thralls. He might be perfectly pleasant one day, even nodding at you in something resembling acknowledgement, then the next day cuff you hard across the head for some minor infraction you didn't even know you committed. You learn to read his moods from the set of his shoulders, the speed of his movements, the tone he uses with his wife. When he's tense, you make yourself scarce. Ingrid, Bjorn's wife, occupies a strange middle ground. She's free, certainly, and orders thralls around with casual authority, but her position in the household is somewhat precarious. Astrid still clearly runs everything, and Ingrid's attempts to assert herself sometimes meet resistance. She takes out these small frustrations on the thralls, especially Sina, whom she seems to view with particular dislike. Perhaps it's because Sina is young and would be pretty if she weren't perpetually exhausted and filthy. Perhaps Ingrid sees her as a potential threat, worried that Bjorn might decide to exercise the master's traditional prerogative, regardless of Astrid's rules. Or perhaps Ingrid simply needs someone weaker to dominate, and Sina is convenient. Whatever the reason, you notice that Sina gets the worst tasks, the harshest corrections, the most criticism. It's not overt abuse, nothing that would prompt Astrid to intervene, just a constant wearing down that takes its toll. The children are their own category of danger. The boy, Harold, is about 8 and already showing signs of the casual cruelty that privilege breeds. He trips thralls carrying heavy loads, hides tools so you'll be blamed for losing them, sometimes throws small stones when adults aren't watching. His sister Freya is younger, perhaps 6, and still occasionally shows flickers of empathy. Once she brought you water when you were working in the hot sun, a tiny kindness that nearly made you weep. But you watch her learning from her brother, learning that thralls aren't quite people, and you can see the empathy fading as social conditioning takes hold. In a few years she'll be as casually cruel as any adult. It's depressing to witness childhood innocence corrupted by a system that requires some humans to be considered less than others. But there are others in the household ecosystem too. Free farmhands who work for wages or shares the harvest rather than ownership stakes. These men occupy an interesting position, higher than thralls but lower than the family, and they seem acutely aware of the precariousness of their status. Some take every opportunity to emphasize their superiority over you, ordering thralls around unnecessarily, making shows of authority to distinguish themselves from the enslaved. Others are more sympathetic, occasionally sharing information or warning you when family members are in bad moods. One farmhand named Ivar sometimes sneaks extra food to the thralls after meals, though he's careful to never be caught. You suspect he might have been a thrall himself once, or perhaps comes from a family that fell into and then climbed out of slavery. There's a recognition in his eyes when he looks at you, a shared understanding of what it means to be powerless. Then there are the visitors, a constant stream of neighbours, travelling merchants, distant relatives, and others who pass through the household. Each visit recalibrates the social dynamics. When important guests arrive, the thralls are worked even harder to maintain appearances, but sometimes better fed as surplus feast food trickles down. When certain gossipy neighbours visit, Ingrid becomes more harsh with the thralls, apparently trying to demonstrate her authority. When Astrid's sister visits, a wealthy woman married to a ship captain, even Bjorn moderates his behaviour, and the entire household operates more smoothly. You become adept at reading these shifts, adjusting your behaviour to minimise risk. Historians still argue whether Viking households operated as this extended families with more flexible hierarchies or as strict class systems with rigid boundaries. From your perspective on the lowest rung, the hierarchy is crystal clear. Thralls at the bottom, free servants and farmhands above them, married-in family members like Ingrid above them, blood family like Bjorn and the children above them, and Astrid at the top. But within this structure there's constant negotiation, alliance building, and jockeying for position among the free members. You're like furniture that can observe the family dynamics but never participate in them. Present for every argument, privy to every secret, witness to every private moment, yet completely excluded from the social world those moments construct. You learn, for instance, that Bjorn gambles more than Astrid knows, sometimes losing silver that the farm can't afford to spare. You learn that Ingrid is pregnant again, but hasn't told anyone yet. Probably because she's afraid. She nearly died birthing Freya. You learn that Astrid is considering arranging a marriage for a nephew, using the farm's resources to secure an advantageous connection. You know that Harold is struggling with reading the runes his grandfather's friend is teaching him, and that Freya is afraid of the dark. You know which farmhands are sleeping together despite one being married to someone else. You know everything about these people's lives except the one thing that matters, their capacity for mercy toward you. One afternoon you witness an interaction that crystallizes the household dynamics perfectly. Young Harold comes running into the longhouse crying because he fell and scraped his knee. Ingrid immediately drops everything to comfort him, cleaning the wound and applying a poultice while making soothing sounds. Astrid looks over with concern, asking if the boy is all right. Even Bjorn stops his work to check on his son. The entire household pivots around this child's minor injury, everyone contributing to his care and comfort. Later that same day, Leif cuts his hand badly while chopping wood, a deep gash that bleeds profusely and will definitely leave a scar. He wraps it in a rag and continues working. Nobody asks if he's all right. Nobody offers medicine or comfort. Helga eventually gives him some moss to pack the wound, but only to prevent infection that might reduce his work capacity. The contrast is stark, brutal, and completely normal. Harold's scraped knee matters because he matters. Leif's sliced hand doesn't matter because he doesn't matter, not in the ways that count. Yet despite this hierarchy, or perhaps because of it, you notice something interesting. The thralls know more about how the household actually functions than many of the free members. You know where everything is stored, which tools need repair when supplies are running low, how much food remains for winter. You know the patterns of the animals, the rhythms of the work, the 100 small details that keep a farm operating. The free family makes decisions, certainly, but thralls provide the information and labour that make those decisions possible. It's a strange kind of power, the power of the indispensable. They could replace any individual thrall, of course, but they can't function without thralls as a category. This doesn't make you equal, doesn't protect you, doesn't give you any real autonomy. but it means you're not quite as powerless as the chains once suggested. The first snow falls on a morning in late autumn, and you wake to an eerie silence in the Thrall house. The sound-dampening quality of fresh snowfall that makes the world feel muffled and strange. You stumble outside for the morning waterhaul and stop, momentarily stunned despite your exhaustion. Everything is white. The farmstead, the fields, the mountains beyond, all transformed into a landscape of pristine beauty that would be breathtaking if you weren't absolutely terrified. You've heard the other thralls talking about winter in hushed, fearful tones. Now it's here, and you're wholly unprepared for what's coming. The cold hits differently than you expected. It's not just the temperature, though that's brutal enough. It's the way it seeps into everything. Your thin thrall clothing, already worn and patched, provides almost no insulation. The shoes on your feet have holes that let in snow and moisture, leaving your toes numb and aching. The Thrall house, which seemed merely uncomfortable in summer and autumn, becomes a genuine threat to survival as temperatures plummet. There's still no fire, no heating source except body heat, and 6 bodies aren't enough to warm the space adequately when frost forms on the inside of the walls. The work changes with the season. Field labour largely ceases. You can't plough or plant frozen ground. But somehow this doesn't mean less work, just different work. Snow must be constantly cleared from pathways between buildings. Ice must be broken on the well every single morning before you can haul water, adding brutal minutes to an already brutal task. Your wet hands freeze to the rope, skin tearing when you pull away. The animals need more attention now that they're confined to their pens rather than pasturing. More mucking, more feeding, more hauling of hay and water. And there's indoor work that was always present but intensifies in winter. Wool processing, spinning, weaving, food preparation, maintenance of tools and equipment, rendering of fat, smoking of meat. The work never ends, it just moves indoors where at least you're slightly less likely to freeze to death. But slightly less likely isn't the same as safe. Within the first month of winter you understand that this season is when thralls die. The cold, the inadequate food, the exhausting labour, the lack of proper shelter, it's all designed for free people who sleep in heated longhouses and eat properly and rest when tired. For thralls, it's a perfect storm of lethal conditions. You watch Leif develop a cough that grows steadily worse. You watch Sina's lips turn blue despite working near the longhouse fire. You feel your own body struggling, your movements growing slower, your mind fuzzy from hunger and cold, your hands so numb you can barely grip tools. The household's food stores, you realise, are calculated for a specific number of mouths, primarily the free family, with thralls as an afterthought. The harvest was adequate but not generous, and Astrid rations carefully to ensure everyone survives until spring, everyone who matters anyway. Thralls receive even less food than during summer, probably because the family assumes you're doing less work. They don't factor in how many more calories your body burns just trying to stay warm, how the cold makes every task twice as difficult, how hunger and hypothermia compound into a deadly spiral. You're losing weight you didn't have to spare, your body consuming itself to generate heat and energy. One morning, perhaps 6 weeks into winter, you wake to find that one of the field thralls who sometimes slept in the thrall house, an older man whose name you never learned, hasn't woken up at all. He's simply dead, frozen in the night, his body curled in a fetal position on his sleeping platform. Helga discovers him and reports to Astrid with no more emotion than she'd report a broken tool. Astrid nods, sighs, the sigh seeming more about inconvenience than grief, and assigns 2 thralls to remove the body. You help carry him out, his corpse stiff and awkward, and watch as he's left in a small outbuilding to await burial when the ground thaws, if he's buried at all. Historians still argue whether thralls received proper burial rites or were simply disposed of with minimal ceremony, archaeological evidence being ambiguous on the treatment of slave bodies. The death shakes everyone in the thrall house, though nobody discusses it directly. That night, people sleep closer together than usual, unconsciously seeking shared warmth. Sina's cough worsens, and Helga actually shows concern, dosing her with some bitter herbal concoction and making her sleep nearest to the others for maximum heat. It's not mercy, exactly. Helga is protecting Astrid's investment, but the effect is the same. Sina survives the night and the next, and gradually the cough improves. But it's close. Everyone knows how close. You develop your own strategies for surviving the cold. You learn to wrap your feet in extra cloth strips before putting on your shoes, even though this makes them tighter and more uncomfortable. Wet feet are deadly feet. You learn to keep moving constantly, even when exhausted, because stopping means freezing. You learn to position yourself near the longhouse fire whenever possible, absorbing every precious moment of warmth. You learn to eat snow when your mouth is dry rather than wasting energy hauling extra water just for drinking. You learn to sleep curled as tightly as possible, preserving every bit of body heat. These are small adaptations, probably insufficient, but they're all you have. The days become impossibly short. The sun rises late and sets early, leaving you working in darkness at both ends of the day. The constant darkness has a psychological weight beyond the physical cold. It's oppressive, depressing, a blanket of gloom that makes hope feel impossible. The Free family suffers from this too, you notice. They grow irritable, snapping at each other, spending long hours simply sitting by the fire staring at nothing. At least they have fire. At least they have adequate food and warm clothing. Their winter blues are nothing compared to the existential dread that settles over the thrall house, where every morning brings the question, will we all still be alive tomorrow? There are tiny mercies. The Yule celebration, a midwinter festival marking the longest night, brings another feast, another chance to eat well, however briefly. The household slaughters a pig and roasts it entirely, and the smell drives you nearly mad with hunger while you work. But after the Free family gorges themselves, the thralls receive portions of meat and fat that feel like salvation. You eat slowly, making it last, trying to absorb every calorie. For perhaps 3 days after Yule, you feel almost human again. Energy returning, mind clearing, body functioning properly. Then the food runs out and you sink back into the fog of hunger and cold. Ingrid gives birth during the darkest part of winter, and the household erupts into controlled chaos. The midwife is summoned, a free woman from a neighbouring farm who's delivered dozens of babies. Helga assists, her experience apparently valuable even in free births. The labour lasts all night and into the next day. Ingrid screams echoing through the longhouse while everyone tries to continue normal activities and pretend they're not terrified. Women died in childbirth regularly. Everyone knew someone who had. Finally, toward evening, a baby's cry pierces the air. A son, healthy and loud. Bjorn's face transforms with joy and relief. Astrid permits a small celebration, breaking out preserved honey and sharing it around. Even the thralls receive a tiny taste, golden sweetness on your tongue like a message from summer. The baby changes the household dynamics in subtle ways. Ingrid is occupied with nursing and recovery, meaning her attention shifts away from harassing Sina. Bjorn is distracted by fatherhood, more pleasant in general. Astrid takes on more direct management of the thralls, which is actually preferable. She's strict but clear in her expectations, and there's something about new life in the dead of winter that lifts everyone's spirits, even yours. The baby represents continuity, hope, the promise that winter always eventually ends and life continues. You're not part of that continuation, not really. This child will grow up to order you around if you survive that long. But still, the crying and fussing and constant needs of an infant inject energy into the stagnant winter darkness. You make it to the winter solstice, then past it, into the gradual brightening as days imperceptibly lengthen. You make it through the worst cold snaps, through the blizzards that pile snow higher than your head, through the endless monotony of indoor work. You make it past the deaths of 2 more thralls on neighbouring farms, news that filters through the community with grim acceptance. You make it fundamentally, because stopping isn't an option. There's no giving up in thraldom. You either survive or you don't, but the choice isn't really yours. Your body keeps moving because movement is required. So you move. Spring arrives slowly, reluctantly, as if winter is unwilling to release its grip on the land. You notice it first in small signs. The icicles hanging from the longhouse roof begin to drip during midday, creating musical sounds as water hits the snow below. The sun, when it appears between grey clouds, carries actual warmth for the first time in months. Birds return, their calls jarring after the silence of winter. And one morning, when you break the ice on the well, the layer is noticeably thinner than yesterday. You're going to survive. The realization hits with unexpected force, bringing tears to your eyes that you quickly blink away. You survived your first winter as a thrall, but survival has a price, and you pay it in the mirror of still water when you pause to catch your breath during the morning water haul. The face looking back is almost unrecognizable. Gaunt, aged, hollowed by months of inadequate food and brutal labour. You're perhaps 20 pounds lighter than when you arrived, weight you didn't have to lose. Your hands are scarred and calloused, nails broken and discoloured. Your hair, which you haven't properly washed in months, hangs in matted tangles. You look like exactly what you are, property that's been used hard. The person you were, the villager with family and friends and a future, has been physically erased, replaced by this skeletal creature whose only purpose is work. Spring means the return of field labour, and you greet it with mixed feelings. Yes, it's back-breaking work under the strengthening sun. Yes, your soft hands from winter indoor work will blister again. But it also means being outside, breathing fresh air, feeling warmth on your face, seeing green things grow. After months of smoky confinement, even brutal field labour feels like a kind of freedom. You're assigned to ploughing, working alongside Orm and 2 free farmhands who guide the oxen, while thralls handle the heavy plough, forcing it through earth that's barely thawed. The work is exhausting, but there's satisfaction in watching the neat furrows form behind you, dark soil turning over to reveal earthworms and roots and the promise of new growth. But spring also brings something darker, the return of raiding season. As the fjords clear of ice and the seas become navigable, longships begin appearing in the harbour again. Young men gather, excited and restless after the confined winter, eager to sail south and west in search of plunder and glory. You watch them prepare, sharpening weapons, repairing ships, gathering supplies, and feel a complicated mixture of emotions. These men, or men exactly like them, destroyed your life. They're preparing to do the same to others, to create more thralls, more grief, more families torn apart, and yet you're so beaten down by daily survival that you can barely muster the energy for righteous anger. Mostly you feel tired and grateful that you're not being forced to join the expeditions as a rower or labourer. One of the raiding parties brings back captives in late spring, and you're forced to watch as new thralls are marched through the marketplace. You recognise the expressions on their faces, the shock, the disbelief, the desperate hope that this isn't really happening. You want to tell them something, offer some comfort or warning, but you don't speak their language and wouldn't know what to say anyway. Welcome to hell? It gets easier? Both statements are true and false in equal measure. Instead, you just watch as they're sold, as their lives are reduced to quantities of silver, as they join the ranks of the enslaved. The cycle continues, endless and grinding, powered by violence and justified by custom. But the new arrivals do bring something unexpected. Information. One young woman, captured from a monastery in Ireland, speaks Latin in addition to her native tongue. Helga knows some church Latin from somewhere in her mysterious past, and through this bridge of language, news filters into the Thrall house. The monastery thrall reports that there's been plague in parts of Britain, that a king somewhere died and his sons are fighting over the succession, that Christian missionaries continue pushing north into pagan territories. It's gossip, really. Fragments of news that barely matter to people whose entire world has shrunk to this one farm. But it's contact with the larger world, proof that life continues beyond this narrow existence, and somehow that's comforting. The household dynamics shift again with the return of raiding season. Bjorn becomes restless, clearly wishing he could join the expeditions, but bound to the farm by responsibility and his mother's expectations. He takes out this frustration in ways both petty and painful. One afternoon he decides that life has been moving too slowly with the wood splitting and strikes him across the back with a length of rope. Not hard enough to cause serious injury, but hard enough to leave welts. Leif makes no sound, doesn't cry out or protest, just returns to his work with slightly more urgency. This is the correct response. Showing pain or resistance would only invite more punishment. You watch, trying to keep your face neutral, adding this incident to your mental catalogue of dangerous situations to avoid. Astrid witnesses the punishment and doesn't intervene, though you see a flicker of disapproval cross her face. Later you overhear her speaking sharply to Bjorn about something. You can't make out the words, but the tone is clear. He's being scolded, probably for damaging property unnecessarily rather than out of concern for Leif's well-being. The distinction matters less than you'd think. Leif's back receives some salve from Helga regardless of the motivation. And Bjorn is slightly more restrained in his frustrations for the next few weeks. This is how the system regulates itself, not through mercy or justice, but through economic calculation. Damaged thralls are less productive thralls, and productivity is what matters. Historians still argue whether physical punishment of thralls was routine or reserved for serious infractions, whether most Viking masters were casually violent or preferred to maintain their property's value. From your ground-level view, it varies enormously by household and individual. You've heard stories from thralls on other farms, tales of masters who beat slaves daily for entertainment, who maimed them for minor infractions, who treated human beings with less consideration than they'd give a sick cow. By those standards, Astrid's household is almost gentle. By any reasonable human standard, it's a nightmare. Both things can be true simultaneously. Summer arrives properly, and with it comes the busiest season of the agricultural year. The fields explode with growth that requires constant attention, weeding, watering in dry spells, protecting crops from animals and birds. The days stretch long, the sun barely setting before rising again, and you work during all available light. 16-hour days become normal, with only brief breaks for food and the most basic necessities. You're exhausted to the point where sleep feels like losing consciousness rather than rest. Your body simply shutting down the moment you lie on your straw mattress, then jerking awake what feels like minutes later to start again. But there's also abundance. Food becomes more plentiful as early crops mature. Fresh vegetables, new milk from the cows, eggs from chickens who are laying prolifically. The thrall's portions increase because well-fed labourers can work longer hours during this critical season. You're still hungry, still eating far less than you need, but the constant gnawing desperation of winter eases. Your body begins to recover slightly, muscles rebuilding, energy returning in small increments. You'll never be as strong as you were before enslavement. Chronic malnutrition has seen to that. But you achieve a sort of equilibrium, a baseline level of functionality that allows you to work without quite killing yourself in the process. One evening, after an especially long day of harvesting early barley, you collapse in the thrall house and notice something remarkable. You're not thinking about home. For the first time in months, perhaps since your capture, an entire day has passed without you dwelling on your family, your village, your old life. The realization is horrifying. This is what Helga meant about forgetting. You're adapting. Your mind protecting itself by releasing memories that cause too much pain to maintain. You're becoming a thrall not just in legal status, but in identity. Your sense of self slowly eroding under the relentless pressure of survival. You try to remember your mother's face and find the images fuzzy, indistinct. You try to recall your childhood home and realize you can't remember how many windows it had. The details are slipping away and you're powerless to stop it. Perhaps you don't even want to stop it. Perhaps forgetting is the only way to bear this existence. The concept of freedom becomes abstract, theoretical, something that exists for other people in other lives but has no practical application to your existence. Yet despite this, or perhaps because of it, you find yourself obsessed with the rare stories of manumission, the formal freeing of thralls. Helga, during one of the nighttime conversations in the thrall house, explains the possibilities in her fragmented way, though her tone makes clear how unlikely any of them are. A master might free a thrall in their will, granting freedom upon death. A thrall might, theoretically, purchase their own freedom if they somehow accumulated enough wealth. Though how a person who owns nothing and earns nothing could save silver remains mysterious. A thrall woman might be freed upon bearing her master's child, though this seems more like trading one form of bondage for another. Or rarest of all, a master might simply choose to free a thrall as a reward for exceptional service or loyalty. You learn that freed thralls don't become fully free in the way you understand the term. They become freed men or freed women, a distinct legal category that's better than slavery, but far from true freedom. Historians still argue whether Norse freedmen enjoyed rights comparable to freeborn people, or remained in a subordinate status for generations, with their descendants carrying the stigma of slave ancestry. From the fragments Helga shares, it seems that freedmen owe continued obligations to their former masters, labour during busy seasons, military service if called, portions of any wealth they accumulate. They can own property and marry, but they exist in a liminal space between slavery and freedom, never quite escaping the shadow of their former status. Still, even this half-freedom seems impossibly desirable. You begin to fantasize about it during the long hours of labour, imagining what you might do if freed, where you might go, how you might live. The fantasies are elaborate and detailed. You'd work as a hired labourer, saving every bit of silver. You'd rent a tiny plot of land and grow your own food. You'd perhaps marry another freed person, have children who would be born free, or at least freer than you. The dreams are painful because they highlight the chasm between imagination and reality, but you can't stop spinning them. They're the only escape available. Escape in the literal sense is occasionally attempted, though rarely successfully. During your second summer as a thrall, a young man from a neighbouring farm tries to run. You hear about it from the other thralls. He disappeared one night, simply vanished from his sleeping quarters. For 3 days there's excited whispered speculation about whether he made it, whether he found a ship willing to hide him, whether he's somehow navigating back to his homeland. Then the news arrives. He was caught, turned in by a farmer who spotted him trying to steal food, recognized him as a runaway, and collected the reward. The punishment is public, designed to discourage others. His right foot is cut off at the ankle, crippling him permanently, marking him forever as a runaway, reducing his value and ensuring he'll never try again. He survives the maiming but dies of infection 2 weeks later. The message is clear. Attempting escape is choosing a slow, painful death over a quick one. Yet people still try. The human desire for freedom apparently outweighs even the certainty of brutal punishment. Later that summer, 2 thralls from different farms attempt a coordinated escape, stealing a small fishing boat and trying to row south under cover of darkness. They're caught within hours when the weather turns and they're blown back to shore. Both are hanged, their bodies left hanging at a crossroads as a warning. You're forced to walk past them on an errand to a neighbouring farm, and the sight burns into your memory. 2 human beings reduced to rotting meat dangling from ropes, picked at by crows. They'd rather die trying to be free than live in chains. You can't decide if that makes them brave or foolish. Probably both. The legal system, such as you understand it, offers no protection to thralls. A master can beat you, maim you, or kill you with essentially no legal consequences, as long as they're killing their own property rather than someone else's. If a free person who's not your master kills you, they owe compensation to your owner, not for your life, but for the property value lost. The price of a thrall's life is calculated like the price of a cow or a plough, based on age, health, and utility. You're worth perhaps 12 to 15 pieces of silver now, having survived long enough to prove you're durable but still young enough for years of work. When you die, and you will die, probably before reaching old age, your corpse will be worth nothing at all. There are no thrall advocates, no system of appeal, no authority you can petition for better treatment. The law recognizes you as a thing, not a person. Even the gods, as you understand Norse belief from fragments of overheard conversation, don't particularly care about thralls. The afterlife promises glory for warriors who die in battle, comfortable halls for farmers and craftsmen, but nobody mentions where thralls go after death. Perhaps nowhere. Perhaps the system is designed to erase you so completely that even your soul is considered property, surrendered to oblivion rather than permitted an afterlife. Yet despite all this, you hear whispered stories of resistance. Small rebellions that inject hope into the hopeless. A thrall on a distant farm who accidentally killed several of the master's sheep before being discovered and punished. A group of thralls who colluded to work slowly, costing their master a significant portion of the harvest. A thrall woman who poisoned her master's family. She was burned alive for it. But the story is told with dark satisfaction nonetheless. These acts of defiance are always discovered, always punished brutally, always end in death or worse than death. But they persist in the collective memory of the enslaved, proof that submission isn't inevitable, that even in total powerlessness some people find ways to fight back. You don't engage in resistance yourself. Partly this is fear. You've seen what happens to rebels. Partly it's pragmatism. Dying in a futile gesture of defiance doesn't improve anything, but mostly it's exhaustion. Resistance requires energy, hope, a belief that your actions matter. You have none of these. You have only the daily grind of survival, the small pleasures of a full stomach or a moment's rest, the tiny companionship of the other thralls in the darkness. This is what the system's designed to do. Grind you down so thoroughly that resistance becomes literally unthinkable. Not because you've been persuaded it's wrong, but because you lack the resources to conceive of it. Do you remember the wooden horse Orm carved? That tiny act of creation in a world designed to prevent thralls from creating anything except labour? One night, weeks after he first showed it, he reveals that he's carved more. A small collection of animals hidden in various cracks and crevices of the thrall house. A bird, a dog, a fish. Each one crude but recognisable, each one a declaration that he still exists as something beyond a tool. He passes them around and everyone holds them with reverence. Sina weeps quietly. Leif laughs the first time you've heard genuine joy from him. Even Helga's face softens. These tiny wooden figures are resistance of a sort, not fighting the system directly, but refusing to be completely consumed by it. They're proof that slavery can control bodies, but not entirely control minds, can own labour, but not fully own souls. That night you ask Orm, through Helga's translation, to teach you to carve. He's surprised but agrees. Over subsequent evenings, in stolen moments before exhaustion claims you, he shows you the basics. How to find suitable wood, how to work with the grain, how to see the shape hidden in the material and coax it out. Your first attempts are disastrous, shapeless lumps that don't resemble anything, but gradually, painfully, you improve. After weeks of practice, you complete your first recognisable figure, a crude sheep. It's terrible, objectively, but it's yours, created by your hands according to your will, the first thing you've made in over a year that's not directly commanded by masters. You hide it with Orm's collection, your small contribution to this secret rebellion of creation. It's not freedom. It's not justice. It's not even particularly meaningful in the grand scheme of things, but it's something. And something you're learning is sometimes enough to keep breathing, keep moving, keep surviving one more day. The religious life of the household swirls around you like smoke, visible but intangible, something you observe without understanding or participating in. The family makes offerings at the small shrine near the main hall, food left for the landvætter, the spirits of the land, and for the household's protective entities. During important occasions they invoke gods whose names have become familiar. Thor with his hammer, Odin the All-Father, Freya for fertility and harvest, Freya for love and war. You watch these rituals from the periphery, neither included nor entirely excluded, present but invisible like a piece of furniture that happens to have eyes. The paradox of your religious position becomes clear during the major festivals. During the blot sacrifices, thralls do much of the physical work. You help prepare the animals, clean the ritual space, serve the feast afterward. Your labour makes the religious ceremony possible, yet you're not considered a proper participant. The gods apparently are invoked for the benefit of the free community. Whether divine favour extends to enslaved people seems ambiguous at best. Helga, when you ask her about this through halting communication, just shrugs. Gods not care about thralls, she says simply. We too. Small. Too low. It's a theology of exclusion. Even the divine realm reflects the social hierarchy, with thralls occupying a space so marginal that supernatural beings can't be bothered to notice your existence. Yet some contradictions exist. During one ceremony, You overhear the Gothai mentioning that thralls will accompany their masters to the afterlife, serving them in death as in life. This is apparently traditional. Archaeological evidence confirms that high-status Vikings were sometimes buried with thralls, who were killed and interred with their masters to provide service in the next world. The practice might be declining by this period. Historians still argue about the timeline, but the concept remains embedded in belief. You find this horrifying. Not only are you enslaved in life, but your death isn't even your own. You exist to serve in this world and potentially the next, denied even the escape of mortality. One night, Leif reveals that he's Christian, or was Christian before capture. He speaks carefully about his faith, aware that open Christianity can be dangerous in pagan households. He describes a God who values all souls equally, who died for the salvation of everyone, slave and free, rich and poor. The concept seems revolutionary, almost incomprehensible. A God who cares about thralls, who considers your suffering meaningful. Helga listens skeptically, having heard Christian preaching before and found it wanting. Christians say everyone equal before God, she observes, but Christian have slaves too, same as us. Maybe worse. She's not wrong. The Christian kingdoms to the south and west maintain robust slave systems, apparently unbothered by any contradiction between faith and practice. Still, Leif's quiet faith provides him something you can see but not fully understand, an internal anchor, a sense that his true self exists beyond the physical degradation of slavery. He prays silently sometimes, lips moving without sound, eyes closed. You envy him this certainty, this connection to something larger than the daily grind. Your own gods, the deities of your homeland, seem impossibly distant now, if they were ever real at all. You haven't prayed since capture. What would you say? The prayers of your childhood, requests for good harvest, protection for family, small domestic concerns, seem absurd in your current context. And prayers for freedom, for escape, for justice? Those feel like shouting into a void that swallows sound without echo. The household's religious calendar marks time in ways that are both meaningful and arbitrary. You learn to anticipate festivals because they mean better food, but the spiritual significance remains opaque. The celebration of Vetraneta, winter nights, marks the transition to the dark season. Yule in midwinter brings feasting and gift-giving among the free, while thralls receive scraps and continue working. The spring blot asks for successful planting and fertile livestock. Each ritual follows patterns you begin to recognize: the formal words, the sacrifice, the communal meal, the carefully maintained traditions linking present to past. You're witnessing the cultural continuity of a people who know who they are and where they came from. Meanwhile, you're being systematically severed from your own cultural roots, your own rituals and beliefs fading like the memories of your mother's face. There are smaller, stranger beliefs too. The household is careful about certain things. Thresholds are protected with iron to keep out harmful spirits. Certain words aren't spoken at night. Specific days are considered unlucky for beginning new projects. Astrid consults a Volva, a wise woman, when Ingrid was pregnant, seeking prophecies about the child. The Volva came to the farm, performed strange rituals you didn't fully see, and apparently predicted a healthy son, which proved accurate. Whether this was genuine prophecy or educated guessing, the free people believe in such things, shape their actions around supernatural concerns that seem quaint or terrifying depending on your mood. You notice, too, that the thralls carry their own fragmented beliefs and practices. Sina makes small protective gestures that seem rooted in Danish folk magic. Orm occasionally arranges stones in patterns that might be meaningful or might be coincidence. Leif has his Christian prayers. Helga knows herbal lore that seems to blend practical medicine with something more mystical. She mutters over certain preparations, as if words have power to enhance healing. And the new Irish thrall from the monastery sometimes traces cross symbols in the air when she thinks nobody's watching. This underground spiritual life exists parallel to the household's official religion, a hidden current of belief that the masters either don't notice or choose to ignore as long as it doesn't interfere with work. One thing becomes clear through observation. Religion in this society reinforces social order. The gods favour warriors and successful farmers. Prosperity is a sign of divine approval. Slavery exists because it's always existed, because it's natural, because the strong rule the weak and the gods smile on strength. There's no divine mandate to treat thralls well, no religious obligation to consider your humanity, no spiritual consequence for cruelty. The system is self-reinforcing. Social structure reflects cosmic order, and cosmic order justifies social structure. If you're a thrall, it's because that's your fate you're weird, the destiny woven for you by forces beyond anyone's control. Submitting to this fate is proper. Fighting it is futile. The theology of the powerful always justifies the power they hold. Yet even in this closed system, questions seep through. Late one night, after a particularly brutal day when Bjorn punished Orm for some minor infraction, Orm asks, to no one in particular, to everyone, to the darkness itself, "Why gods make thralls?" Nobody answers immediately. Then Helga, her voice tired and flat, responds, "Gods not make thralls. People make thralls. Gods just watch." It's a theological statement that might get her in trouble if overheard, suggesting that slavery is a human institution rather than divine mandate. Or maybe she's saying the gods exist but don't care. Or maybe she's lost faith entirely and is just saying words that provide temporary comfort. Historians still argue whether Viking Age Scandinavians believed in an interventionist deity system, or a more fatalistic worldview where even gods were subject to fate. From your perspective, it hardly matters whether gods ordained your slavery or merely permit it, whether they care about your suffering or ignore it. The practical result is the same. You wake each morning in chains, literal or metaphorical, and face another day of labour for masters who will never see you as fully human. If gods exist, they're not helping. If they don't exist, the universe is indifferent to justice. Either way, you're alone, relying only on your own endurance and the fragile solidarity of other thralls to survive. Death, when it comes for thralls, arrives with neither ceremony nor surprise. You've been enslaved for nearly 3 years when Helga falls ill during the autumn season. It starts as a cough, similar to what others have had and recovered from, but this time it deepens and spreads, settling into her lungs with a wet, rattling sound that keeps everyone in the thrall house awake at night. She continues working because there's no alternative. Thralls don't get sick days, but you watch her deteriorate with each passing week. Her face becomes gaunt, her movements slower, her breathing laboured. She knows she's dying. Everyone knows. Astrid provides some herbal remedies, not out of compassion but from practical concern. Helga's valuable, experienced, the linchpin that keeps the thrall workforce functioning smoothly. But the remedies don't work or don't work well enough. Helga continues fading, her body consuming itself trying to fight an infection it can't overcome. One morning, about 6 weeks after the cough started, she simply can't rise from her sleeping platform. Her eyes are glassy with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Signa reports this to the household, and Astrid comes to examine her. The first time you've seen your owner enter the thrall house. Astrid looks at Helga with what might be regret or might just be irritation at the inconvenience, then shakes her head and leaves. Helga dies that evening, surrounded by the other thralls in the cramped space that's been her home for 3 decades. Her last words are in her original language, something none of you understand, perhaps calling for family long dead, perhaps just nonsense produced by fever. Leif closes her eyes after she stops breathing. You all sit in silence for a while. Not quite grief, but something adjacent to it. Helga wasn't kind, exactly. She couldn't afford kindness, but she was familiar, a constant presence, the closest thing you had to a leader or protector. Now she's gone, and you're diminished by her absence. The disposal of her body is perfunctory. 2 thralls carry her corpse to a shallow grave dug at the edge of the property, in unconsecrated ground far from where free people are buried. There's no ceremony, no word spoken, no marking of the grave. Helga is simply placed in the earth and covered, her decades of labour and suffering and endurance erased as if they never existed. Within weeks grass grows over the spot, and you can barely find it even when you try. This apparently is what awaits you all. Anonymous graves, unmarked and unmourned, your lives reduced to nothing but the labour extracted from them. Archaeological evidence of Thrall burials is sparse and ambiguous. Some enslaved people seem to have been buried with minimal grave goods, suggesting at least basic funerary recognition. Others appear to have been disposed of in refuse pits or simply left unburied. Their remains later discovered by archaeologists who pieced together lives from bone stress markers and isotope analysis. Historians still argue whether this variation reflects different household practices, regional customs, or simply the randomness of what survives in the archaeological record. You don't know which fate awaits you, and you won't know until it happens. Helga's death creates a void in the household's functioning. She was the translator, the mediator between masters and thralls, the repository of knowledge about how things work. Astrid promotes you, somewhat reluctantly, to take over some of these responsibilities, not because you're particularly qualified, but because you've survived longer than the newer thralls and can communicate in basic Norse now. 3 years of immersion forcing language into your brain whether you wanted it or not. Suddenly you're explaining tasks to new captives, translating orders, managing the work assignments. It's not a promotion in any meaningful sense. You receive no extra food, no better treatment, no change in status. Just more responsibility and the vague threat that if the household operates less smoothly, you'll be blamed. The weight of this role settles heavily. You're not just surviving now, you're part of the mechanism that keeps others enslaved. When you translate Bjorn's harsh orders, when you push newer thralls to work faster, when you report problems to Astrid, you're collaborating with the system that oppresses you. The moral compromise is inescapable. Refuse and you'll be replaced by someone else who will do it. Probably while you're punished for insubordination. The only choice is how much of yourself you lose in the process of staying alive. You think often about death now in ways you didn't before. Not actively suicidal, you're too ground down for that kind of dramatic gesture, but passively curious about what comes after. Would death be relief? Oblivion? Or just another form of servitude if the Norse afterlife beliefs are accurate? Leif, with his Christian faith, speaks of heaven and salvation, but also of hell for the wicked. You're not sure which category enslaved people fall into in his theology. Are you damned for surviving through compromise, or innocent victims whose suffering will be rewarded? He can't or won't answer clearly. More thralls die over the following year. A young man kicks by one of the horses, his skull fractured, dead within hours. An older woman who simply stops eating, choosing slow starvation over continued existence. Her body found curled in the thrall house one morning. A field worker who collapses during harvest, heart giving out from exhaustion and heat. Each death is noted, bodies disposed of, work redistributed among survivors. The household continues functioning because individual thralls are replaceable. The institution of slavery persists regardless of how many enslaved people die within it. You're all just components in a machine, and machines don't mourn broken parts, they just install replacements. You've now outlived your statistical life expectancy as a thrall. Most enslaved people in Viking society died within 5 to 7 years of capture, according to the sparse evidence historians can assemble. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, violence, exposure. The causes were varied, but the result was consistent. Thralls died young. The fact that you're still alive after more than 3 years suggests either remarkable luck or stubborn resilience, perhaps both, but you feel the toll in your body. The chronic pain in your back, the stiffness in your joints, the teeth that are starting to loosen from poor nutrition, the scars that map your years of servitude. You're aging rapidly, each year as a thrall worth several years of normal life. Do you remember your mother's face clearly anymore? The answer, painfully, is no. The details have blurred, replaced by Astrid's stern expression, Ingrid's irritable frown seen as exhausted features. Your mental landscape has been colonized by your captors, your memories overwritten by the daily reality of slavery. This too is a kind of death, the death of who you were, accomplished gradually through the erosion of everything that made you yourself. You survive physically while dying psychologically, your original identity replaced by the role you're forced to perform. Yet somehow, incomprehensibly, you continue. You wake each morning, you haul water, you work fields, you serve meals, you carve small wooden figures in stolen moments, your collection growing to match Orm's now. You share whispered conversations in the thrall house darkness. You notice the seasons changing. Find small beauty in sunrise over the fjord. Feel satisfaction when a difficult task is completed well. These tiny things don't justify or excuse the system. They don't make slavery acceptable or your suffering meaningful. They're just the small, stubborn insistence of consciousness that, even in hell, life finds ways to assert itself. You hate this place, hate your masters, hate what's been done to you, and yet you notice that the first flowers of spring are blooming near the longhouse, and some diminished part of you thinks they're beautiful. The human capacity to adapt is both salvation and tragedy. It lets you survive, but survival requires becoming someone you never wanted to be. 5 years have passed since the morning the raiders came. 5 years of labour and submission, of survival and slow erasure, of becoming something other than what you were. You're still alive, which itself is remarkable. Most thralls captured at your age would be dead or broken by now. But survival has costs that aren't immediately visible. You move differently now, with the careful economy of someone whose body hurts constantly. Your hands are so calloused and scarred they barely register pain anymore, which is both blessing and curse. Your face, glimpsed in reflections, belongs to someone 10 years older than you actually are. The person you were, the villager with dreams and family and a name that meant something, has been almost entirely consumed by the thrall you've become. The household continues its cycles, indifferent to your personal timeline. Astrid grows older, slightly softer, beginning to cede more authority to Bjorn, though she still rules the household with iron efficiency. Bjorn's children grow. Harold is now a teenager, already learning to manage the farm and order thralls around with his father's casual authority. Little Freya, who once brought you water in a moment of childish kindness, now ignores you completely, having learned that thralls aren't quite people. Ingrid has borne 2 more children, the household expanding while you remain static, locked in your role. The free people change and develop while you simply endure. New thralls arrive periodically, exchanged in raids or purchased in markets, and you find yourself in Helga's old position, teaching them to survive, translating orders, showing them which tasks are most important and which masters are most dangerous. You see your younger self in their faces, the shock and disbelief, the desperate hope that somehow they'll escape this nightmare. You know better now. Most of them won't escape. Most will die or break, their spirits crushed under the weight of impossible labour and systematic dehumanization. A few, the resilient or lucky ones, will survive long enough to become what you are, efficient, broken, functional pieces of human machinery. Orm is still alive, though barely. He took a bad fall last winter, something internal injured, and he's never fully recovered. He moves slowly now, his breathing laboured, working through obvious pain because the alternative is uselessness and death. His carving has stopped. His hands shake too much for the fine control required. The collection of wooden animals remains hidden in the Thrall house, a secret museum of resistance that outlives its creator's ability to contribute. You add to it occasionally your own skill, having improved through years of practice. A horse, a bird, a human figure that might be a warrior or might be a thrall. From this distance they're hard to distinguish. Sina died 2 years ago, fever taking her quickly in a matter of days. Leif was sold to a ship captain who needed rowers for a trading expedition, and you never learned what became of him after that. The Thrall house population churns, new faces replacing old, the institution persisting while individuals are consumed by it. You're one of the oldest thralls on the farm now, a veteran of survival, which grants you no privileges but does provide a grim satisfaction. You've outlasted them. You've refused to die. It's not much of a victory, but it's something. The archaeological record will remember you, sort of. Centuries from now, researchers will excavate this site and find evidence of habitation, agricultural activity, and social stratification. They'll discover the Thrall house, or what remains of it after rotten time, and identify it by its poor construction and location away from other structures. They might find your grave if you get one, and your bones will tell stories you couldn't speak in life. Stress markers on your skeleton will indicate years of heavy labour. Dental analysis will show periods of severe malnutrition. Chemical signatures in your bones will reveal that you came from somewhere else, that you weren't born into this society but brought here forcibly. Your skeleton will become data, contributing to scholarly understanding of Viking Age slavery, your individual suffering transmuted into statistics and journal articles and museum displays. Historians will debate what your life meant. Some will emphasize the brutality of the system, the cruelty that allowed human beings to be treated as property. Others will note that slavery was nearly universal in medieval societies, that Norse thraldom was not uniquely harsh by the standards of the time. Some will focus on economics, how slave labour enabled Viking expansion and settlement, how the institution was foundational to Norse prosperity. Others will seek evidence of resistance, accommodation, or cultural exchange. All of these perspectives will contain some truth, but none will fully capture what it felt like to be you. The daily grind of survival, the slow erosion of identity, the tiny moments of beauty and connection that persisted despite everything. Your legacy, such as it is, exists in the descendants of Viking settlers who carry DNA from enslaved people in their genetic code. The women who were captured and enslaved, who bore children to masters or fellow thralls, who passed on genetic material from Ireland, Scotland, England, and the Slavic territories. They survive, ghost-like, in the genes of modern populations. This isn't romantic. These women didn't choose to become genetic ancestors. Their bodies were used, their children taken or raised in servitude. their suffering instrumentalized by a system that saw them as a breeding stock. But they persist nonetheless, written into the human genome in ways that can't be fully erased. Your story, the story of millions of enslaved people whose names were never recorded, survives in fragments, in bones, in DNA, in the uncomfortable truth that civilizations were often built on the backs of people who received no credit and no compensation. You don't know any of this, of course. You don't know about archaeology or genetics or historical debate. You know only the immediate reality of your life, the ache in your muscles, the hunger in your belly, the cold of the coming winter, the face of your current master, the weight of the water buckets you'll carry tomorrow morning. You know that you're still alive, still yourself in some diminished way, still capable of noticing that the sunset over the fjord is beautiful, even when everything else is terrible. You know that Orm is dying and you'll miss him when he's gone. You know that the new Thrall girl, the one who arrived last week, reminds you of your sister, and you feel protective of her, even though protection is beyond your power to offer. 5 years as a thrall, perhaps 5 more if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on how you calculate the value of continued existence. Perhaps only 1 more winter if disease or accident or simply exhaustion claims you. The future is uncertain, always has been, but now you understand that uncertainty doesn't mean possibility. The future holds only more of the same, more work, more survival, more slow dying, until eventually you stop. That's not hope and it's not despair, it's just the truth. And after 5 years you've learned that truth is the only thing that doesn't lie to you. Do you remember what hope felt like? That bright, expansive sensation that tomorrow might be better than today, that life could change and improve, that you mattered in the grand scheme of things. You can barely access that memory now. Hope requires energy you don't have, imagination that's been beaten out of you, a belief in personal agency that slavery systematically destroys. What you have instead is persistence, the dumb animal continuation of existence simply because stopping requires more effort than continuing. You breathe, you work, you sleep, you wake and repeat. This is what you've become, a biological machine that operates without meaning or purpose beyond its own operation. And yet, and this is the strangest part, you're still you. Diminished, damaged, fundamentally altered, but not entirely erased. The person who was captured 5 years ago still exists somewhere inside this exhausted shell. When you carve wooden figures in the darkness, that's you. When you notice beauty in unexpected places, that's you. When you feel connection with other thralls, share a moment of dark humour about your circumstances, protect the new girl from Harold's casual cruelty, that's you. The system tried to reduce you to a function, a role, a unit of labour. It mostly succeeded, but not entirely, not completely. Some small, stubborn core of selfhood persists, refusing to be fully consumed. Whether that's triumph or tragedy, you can't quite determine. Maybe it's both. Underscore 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 underscore. The work continues tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. The seasons cycle, the household persists, the institution of slavery grinds forward, consuming individuals while perpetuating itself across generations. You're a small part of an enormous system, one life among thousands, one story in a vast narrative of exploitation that spans continents and centuries. Your individual suffering doesn't matter to history, which deals in broader patterns and larger forces. but it matters to you. It's the only life you have, the only experience you'll ever know. So you wake tomorrow morning before dawn and haul water from the well. You tend the fire, you prepare the meal, you work the fields, you serve the masters, you survive another day. This is your life as a Viking thrall. Not the romance of saga and legend, not the glory of warriors and heroes, but the grinding, inglorious reality of existence at the bottom of a hierarchical society. This is the boring history, the forgotten story, the experience of millions whose names will never be recorded, but whose labour built the world we remember. This is what it means to be property, to be powerless, to be human in a system designed to deny your humanity. And somehow, impossibly, you continue. The sun rises over the fjord, painting the water golden pink, and for just a moment, just one small, stolen moment, you stop and watch it. The beauty doesn't redeem anything. It doesn't make your suffering meaningful or your bondage acceptable. It's just beautiful, and you're still capable of noticing. That small act of attention, that brief moment of aesthetic awareness, is an act of resistance so subtle the masters will never recognize it. But you do. You notice beauty while enslaved, and in that noticing you remain, however tenuously, yourself. The story settles now, like dust after a storm, the weight of years pressing down into stillness. The farmstead continues its cycles, the fjord reflects endless skies, and you simply are. Not free, never free, but stubbornly, persistently present. The wooden figures hidden in the thrall house will outlast your memory, small testaments to the fact that you existed, that you created something beyond your labour, that you were here. The waves continue their ancient rhythm against the shore. The mountains stand eternal, and you, small and forgotten, endure for one more sunset, one more dawn, one more day in the long, difficult continuity of survival. Tomorrow the work begins again. But tonight, in the darkness of the thrall house, surrounded by others who share your fate, you rest. The breathing of your companions becomes a lullaby. The familiar sounds of the night a strange comfort. You survived today. That's enough. It has to be enough. Sleep comes slowly, gently, pulling you down into darkness that's finally peaceful, finally quiet, finally yours alone. Sweet dreams, traveller. May your own rest be deeper, your freedom more certain, your tomorrow bright with possibilities that thralls could only dream of. The story ends, but you wake in your own bed, your own time, your own life stretching before you full of potential. Remember the forgotten ones as you drift into sleep. Remember that history is built from millions of small, anonymous lives. Remember, and then let it all fade into the gentle darkness of rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.